Captain's log, stardate 270798.7. Our ship's central processing unit is overheating. Without it, our navigation system will be down. We'll be lost in space forever. This unit hasn't been tested yet, but it may be our last chance to survive. Well, I'm not actually captaining the Starship Enterprise today, but what I do have is a Corsair H110i GTX CPU cooler. We're going to have to see how this thing measures up. It's supposed to be one of the greatest cooling CPU all-in-one units on the market that is closed loop. We'll see how it does, but before we do that, we'll take a couple quick looks at some of the actual product itself and see how things are looking after we get it out of the box. Alright, so I went ahead and pulled the unit out of the box, and honestly, right off the bat, I'm impressed at how little there actually is to pull out of the box. Here in the accessories package, the first thing I have the USB link cable that helps with the software to help monitor with temperatures, fan speed, pump speed, so on and so forth. Have here what looks to be a back bracket for certain Intel sockets. Here's what looks to be some of my mounting hardware for the actual socket. More mounting hardware, and it looks like I have a bracket here for AMD sockets. And I'm guessing that they're going to go ahead and use the backplate that comes with AM3 Plus motherboards, which is always, in my experience, much easier to install. And then finally, I have some nice long screws and washers to screw the fans into the radiator. Really, this is, compared to a lot of coolers I've already messed with, this is a very small amount of mounting hardware. I'm kind of impressed already. Alright, included with the Corsair unit is two SP140L fans. Now, there's not a whole lot difference between these fans and many other Corsair fans, but there is one key difference. In kind of an attempt to give the end user a little more flexibility on quiet performance versus full out performance, these things end up going up to 2,000 RPM spinning speed, which is pretty fast compared to what a lot of Corsair fans are. On the other hand, that should give us a lot more cooling potential as well. Okay, here's the main part of our CPU cooler, the main part of the H110i GTX. So here we see we've got a 280mm aluminum radiator. Aluminum is lighter, it's a little cheaper to make, so it's not going to be as strong as your copper radiators, but you pay a lot more for your copper radiators, and you usually find those in your custom loops. So a couple of things about this unit that is already impressing me. First off, these hoses. These hoses are braided and look excellent. They look, instead of being like your cheap, flimsy, kind of serrated looking hoses, these look like nylon braided professional, almost like a custom loop type of hose. And even though a lot of custom loops are clear, I really like this braid on the outside. It makes the unit look a lot nicer, as these are going to be wrapping around and going to your processor. It'll look a lot cleaner in the build. Second off, the thing I noticed here is I've got a lot of connectors, more than I'm used to seeing on an all-in-one closed-loop cooler. I have my power here. I have two connectors here for my fans so that I can control them through the unit itself. And it looks like I've got another little 3-pin connector that looks like it'll be dealing with some kind of monitoring, pump speed, so on and so forth. So quite a few more connectors than usual. The block head here looks really nice. You can tell Corsair's kind of changed things up a little bit. Now, it's a little harder to get a good glimpse of it here. But you can see Corsair's logo, and it looks good. It looks like it's got a nice little gray plate. The logo itself should light up, and it should be able to change colors due to the RGB lighting and Corsair Link software. And then, as always, Corsair on their units includes a small swath of thermal paste so that you can instantly install it. Now, we're going to give it a run on that thermal paste. We're also going to wipe it off and see how it compares to a custom thermal paste job with my Prolomitech PK1. So overall, I really like the looks of this unit. Be interesting to see just how well it performs once we get it all installed in the case. Okay, well, we got the Corsair unit installed on the computer, and let's talk about how this install process worked right off the bat. Now, first off, we can see right here that there's 4 bolts that are large enough that you can screw in with your fingers, hence the idea of tool-free assembly. And you can use a screwdriver to make sure that they get nice and cinched down tight, but overall, this is one of the best installs that I've ever used. It uses the AMD backplate to do the install, and then you just slide the pump head on top of the 4 pins, screw everything down, and you're done. I mean, honestly, that was super simple. Radiator, of course, just screws into the top of the case. You do have that 280mm radiator, so you got to have plenty of clearance, but if you do, no troubles there. One more really important thing that I really like on this unit compared to any other all-in-one unit I've used. The hoses, as they're coming down into the blockhead, actually pivot. And so as I was putting it in, the hoses just twisted naturally so that I was able to slide the block onto the processor with hardly any trouble at all. In spite of the large, stiff-looking hoses, it slid on pretty easily. Very good job, Corsair. Next, let's talk about Corsair Link software. This is something that I think doesn't get all the love that it deserves. So first off, you have the computer case that you can arrange pieces of your system that are being monitored onto the actual picture of the case, so it's easier for you to access the various components. This is so you can change configuration, performance modes, so on and so forth. I actually had a pretty easy time using that, and I enjoyed it quite well. There's also ways that you can group things into monitoring groups. You can set up graphs so that you can see a kind of performance curve throughout during a particular stress run, or whatever kind of monitoring you want to do. So overall, those are some pretty good features. They're solid, not necessarily anything that anybody does different. Also, Corsair has the Hue lighting control. Here's something that I kind of wish I could have saw a little bit more of. You pretty much can choose a solid color, or you can do a mode that allows you to follow the temperature of your processor, which is still pretty cool. I kind of wish they could have had a little more options where you could do some breathing type modes, or even do like a various shifts through different color modes. And maybe that's something they have on some of their other units, but on this particular unit I wasn't finding that. But there's one particular thing that Corsair Link is doing perfectly, and I really want to point this out. So with this software, if you plug the fans in and you're using Corsair Link, you're not using your motherboard to control anything really that's going on in the pump, with the fans, any of the performance. And because of that, obviously the Corsair software has to monitor your system temps in order to determine the performance. With Corsair Link, it actually monitors the overall group, the averaged core temperature from what's on your processor. And the reason why this is huge is most other coolers that will plug into your CPU fan headers are actually using a temp temperature that's behind the socket on the board, and it is never as accurate as the actual core temp coming from the processor. The fact that Corsair's unit can use the temperature coming directly from your chip is huge. And that's something that, at least in the reviews I've read and things that I've looked through various different coolers and software, I've never seen anybody pull out about, especially Corsair Link. So that is great to know that your temperature curve is coming directly from the CPU die. Let's talk about what really matters, performance. Okay, I'm sure other things matter, but performance is really important. So I'm only going to highlight a couple of key features, but the rest of them are going to be on the graphs. Now, at stock clocks on the FX8350, the H110i GTX was doing great. I compare it specifically to a Cooler Master Neptune 240M. Now sure, it has a smaller radiator, but still, it's going to give us a good gauge on performance and to see just how much of a differential we pull with the larger radiator. So with the Corsair in performance mode, we were able to get a 35.9 average core temp on that FX8350, which is excellent. Obviously, we are nowhere near, not even anywhere close to what the max is, and that gives us so much headroom for things like overclocking or for just running it safely. Now in comparison, the Neptune ran about 39.7 degrees. So we're not looking at a huge difference right there, but still that's pretty significant with a 5-degree difference. Now here's the really interesting part. When I put the performance mode to silent, the H110 GTX was still 39.2 degrees, which is still beating out a Neptune with a 240 millimeter radiator running at full speed on the fans. And in this particular case, I have upgraded fans with Cougars, and they're really good performance. So then I took the processor, jumped it up to 4.5 gigahertz, and that's when things really got interesting. Now, my Neptune could handle that kind of load and usually average about a 49.8 degree temperature. That's not bad. In fact, that still gives us some more headroom, but we're starting to get closer to that 62, 63 degree limit that AMD recommends. So then when I threw the performance mode on the H110i GTX on that chip, I was able to average a 41.9 degree temperature on the core. That is phenomenal. We're looking at about 8 degrees lower. That gives us so much room that I could push the chip who knows how much farther. But that being said, 4.5 is kind of the upper limit before we start getting into really high voltages, at least in my test system. Even in silent mode, I was able to get a 47.4 average temp, which is still beating out the Neptune. Now granted, this is exactly what I would expect from this unit, especially with the larger radiator, but it's really good to see that huge of a difference. This is definitely a good performing unit. Two more things about this unit. First off, the decibel levels. Now, if you throw this thing on full 100% performance with those fans, you're going to get a pretty loud cooler. I was getting 60 decibels on my particular app that I use on my phone. That's really high. It's uncomfortably loud. You're probably never going to want to do that. But here's the thing. Just using the performance profile, I was able to drop that decibel rating to 52 degrees, which is great. The Neptune with Cougar fans was running 50 decibels. So we're getting that much more performance with hardly any noise loss. That's great. As far as the pump is concerned, it's easily being drowned out by the fans, and between performance or quiet mode, I couldn't even hear the pump either way. So this unit has got every amount of potential. Whether you like a little bit of noise and prefer to have that higher performance, or whether you want it really silent, you have the option to do whatever you want with this unit, and you're still going to come away with good performance. One last thing. I always like to test the manufacturer's included thermal paste compared to my own Prolimatech PK1. Prolimatech's been a great thermal paste. It's been one of the best I've used, and it's a great baseline. In this particular case, my differential was basically 0. I think it was 0.1 difference on the average temp on the overclock. That's perfect. That means the included little swath of thermal paste that Corsair puts on the block is performing excellently and isn't going to hurt your performance in the long run as long as you install it right. Now that being said, my only minor quibble then is the fact that Corsair doesn't include a tube of thermal paste. If you mess up that install and have to reinstall and you didn't buy any thermal paste, then you're sunk and you can't do anything until you get some more. On the other hand, the way they did their pre-applied thermal paste, it's so efficient that it makes it very user-friendly, especially if you've never installed a cooler before, to just slap it on and you're good to go. Kind of a give or take, but overall, Corsair is still doing an excellent job. So what do we have here? Well, we have a unit that looks great. It has a bunch of great features. It has really good included software. Even with some of the bugs that are complained about, personally I didn't run into any of them, and it ran smooth. We have awesome performance. What's left to talk about? Well, price. So the Corsair H110i GTX is retailing for $140. That's about the highest you're going to pay for a closed-loop cooler. On the other hand, I would be really surprised to see any other closed-loop cooler compare on performance. And even just the range of silence to noise that you can choose, I think justifies the fact that you can do whatever you want with this unit. And so therefore, the price isn't that bad. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see this thing coming close to competing with custom loop systems. I still think a custom loop is going to beat it out, but I think it's going to come a lot closer than just about any closed loop cooler has ever come before. And on the other hand, if you get that $10 rebate and it drops down to $130, that's a pretty decent price for the level of unit that you are getting here. So honestly, I have to say that this is just all around a great product. I think it's worth the money. I don't think it's too overpriced, and I think that anybody who puts this in their system will be happy with it in the long run. I'm going to have to give the Corsair H110i GTX an Editor's Choice Award. Captain of Engineering, give her all she's got.